So let's talk about breaking in a deck of playing cards. So breaking in a deck of playing cards is considered by many magicians and cardists to be like a really necessary step when it comes to handling playing cards. So it really is this soft spot in terms of handling. So it's when the cards aren't too slippery, but they're also not too like clumpy, so they're not like bricks, and they're also not too stiff, but they're also not too soft. So it really is this soft spot in terms of like how the cards handle, and it is when many people consider it to be like the optimal time to be like handling the deck. But I actually don't break in my decks anymore. I mean, I just don't really find it necessary. So I mean, I just use them. I just do whatever with them until they move on from one stage of life to the next. So it's just kind of whatever. I mean, you can still break in your decks if you really want, but you know, I don't really find it necessary anymore. So yeah. Now, before we start, I actually do want to give a quick little disclaimer or warning, is that breaking in your cards will cause a few of the cards to bend here and there. And yeah, it's because of the process. So again, if you don't want your cards to be bent, don't really break in your decks, I guess. But you know, that's to each their own, right? But before we begin with breaking in, so the process of breaking in a deck of playing cards, not breaking into a house, I don't know why we used to do that, but you know, so breaking in a deck of playing cards, I just want to go over the 3 stages of life of a deck. So obviously there is a new deck of playing cards, so right out of the box. So that's when the cards are, they have rough edges, the cards are still very slippery, and they're still rather stiff, right? So they aren't like completely, soft, right? I mean, for crushed decks, for crushed stock decks, they're still relatively soft, but they aren't like the softest that they should be, right? And then we have the broken in stage, where the cards now have smooth edges, they're less slippery, but they're not necessarily clumpy, so again, they're not bricks, and they're soft, but they're not like soft, so they're still like able to spring and whatnot. And then we have poop decks. So poop decks are when the edges are very brown because of all the dirt and usage, so they're all very gross. And yeah, they just stick together really well, so they're very good for packet cuts, but you can't really fan them out, you can't really do spreads with them, so again, they're only good for packet cuts. And so yeah, you can't really spring them, or you can't really do like pressure moves with them because they're just so soft and used. So yeah, those are the 3 stages of life of a deck of playing cards. Those are just like 3 general stages. There's like usually like in between stages, or depending on how you break them in, there are some, you know, variables here and there. But yeah, those are the 3 general stages of life of a deck of playing cards. So let's move on to breaking in a deck of playing cards. I'll crack open this deck real quickly just to show the process, I guess, even though I'm not probably going to like do like everything that I'm gonna tell you to, because you know, it's whatever. No, I'll just get out the ad cards. Okay, there we go. So the very first step that you should do with a deck of playing cards is probably to smoothen out the edges. And you're going to do there's a process for that, but yeah, so usually you would smoothen out the edges because you sort of need smooth edges to do Pharaoh shuffles. You kind of don't need like to smoothen out the edges if you don't do Pharaoh work. I mean, as you use the deck, naturally the edges will smoothen out, but again, this is a necessary step if you want to do Pharaoh shuffles right out of the box. Because if you try to do Pharaoh shuffles right out of the box, you'll notice that all the rough edges will make the Pharaoh shuffle actually sort of impossible, right? So it'll like, it's possible, but it's not very like pleasant sounding, right? So again, this is not really a necessary step, but if you want to, then you know, you can. So there are a couple of ways that you can smoothen out edges. Jerry Andrus in Curious Cards actually recommends you to use a piece of sandpaper. So, well, he says like people from the East also told him to use like sandpaper, but you know, he came up with it independently. But yeah, you can use a piece of sandpaper to smoothen out the edges. I don't have sandpaper at home right now, so you know, I can't really show you. But for sandpaper, I would highly recommend you to use finer sandpaper. So if you use sandpaper that has too low of a grit, so if you have like a really coarse piece of sandpaper, so something like 60 or 80, that's pretty coarse for a deck of playing cards, right? So if you're trying to go for just like smoothing out the edges, you should probably go for something that's really fine. So like probably a 180 plus for grit in terms of sandpaper. So again, something super fine that won't like damage the edges of the playing cards, right? So once you have your piece of sandpaper, that's fine, right? Not like coarse. So make sure that it's fine. But once you have it, Jerry Andrus actually tells you to just go over the corners, right? So just to sand out the corners, and that way you'll have your corners ready for a Fibres shuffle. Personally, again, I don't really break in my decks anymore, so that's whatever. But you know, you can also go over every single edge with a piece of sandpaper until the edges aren't rough anymore. So really, it's at your own discretion. Just like go over them. Also, make sure that they're flat, because if you have this, chances are you might fray a deck or a card. So again, make sure that everything is square, and then you're against a surface, and then you just sand all of your surfaces, right? And that's how you use a piece of sandpaper for smoothening out your deck's edges. But obviously, you don't really need to do that. You don't really need to use sandpaper. You can do what I do sometimes, and that is the dumbest thing ever. You just take your thumb and just rub the edges of the deck until they're smooth. It's kind of stupid, but it sort of works. So if it works, then it ain't stupid. I mean, it's still kind of stupid, but you know, it works. But again, it's kind of stupid. You just use your thumb to aggressively smoothen out the edges. I mean, it works. But yeah, but if you want the easiest way to just smoothen out the edges, you can actually take a pair of jeans, place your deck, like pretend this is a pair of jeans, and you just rub the edges of the deck alongside your pair of jeans, and you'll notice that eventually they'll smoothen out. But you might also get a bit of fabric residue in between of the cards. Don't worry, it's just in between of the cards. They won't like stick inside of the card, so don't worry, you just need to like pluck it out. So it's really nothing whatever, right? So to smoothen out the edges of the deck, you can use sandpaper, you can use your thumb by aggressively just rubbing the edges of the deck, or you can use a pair of jeans and you can just go over the edges of the deck with the pair of jeans, right? So those are 3 ways that you can smoothen out the edges of the deck. So the very next thing that you can do to break in a deck of playing cards is to soften the decks, the cards, right? So this step is pretty easy. You just need to do a bunch of pressure moves on the decks, so on the cards, I mean, right? So it's very simple. You just do like springs, you just do lapel spreads, you just do a riffle shuffle and a bridge. But this step is what causes the cards to start to bend and whatever, right? So yeah, so take notice of that. If you don't want your cards to bend, don't do this step. But again, this is mainly everything that's this is the main part of breaking in a deck of playing cards. So yeah, a few pressure moves that you can do. Again, you could do a few springs, right? You can do a couple of lapel spreads. So I'm not going to teach that over here, but that's what you can do. You can do, for example, a riffle shuffle and a bridge, right? So these moves just reduce the friction, just break down the fibers of the playing cards, so then they soften up, right? Because when they're right out of the box, you can notice how stiff they are. But as you use them, and then yeah, they start to loosen up the fibers, and then they're more viable. But after you're done like 1 or 2 pressure moves, make sure to give the deck a cut, so then you're not always bending the same cards, because if you keep bending the same cards over and over and over again, chances are they'll be all disgusting and you don't want to use them. So make sure to give the cards a few cuts before you resume your pressure moves and then doing whatever that you want with the cards, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it for softening up the deck. And so yeah. So when it comes to increasing the friction between playing cards, so right now you can notice that it is pretty like slippery, I guess, right? You can still do yo or whatever. Oh, that's my playing cards. But yeah, you can still do, you're right, they still like glide perfectly fine, and sometimes they might even fall out of your hand, right? So there is not really a way to reduce, to increase friction in between the playing cards. Some people say you have to use like fans and spreads and overhand shuffles to, you know, rub the cards against one another to get them to wear down the finish or whatever to increase friction, right? I don't really know if that helps. Frankly, the main thing about increasing friction, I think, is just like using the cards, because your oils and your dirty hands or whatever, right? They just like cause the cards to have more friction in between by just like dirtying the cards, right? So honestly, I don't really know if like overhand shuffles and fans and spreads, they actually do help, but you know, some people swear by it. I don't think it helps, but again, right? So easiest way to increase the friction in between the cards is just to use them. So yeah. So it is a rather quick video to go through. I mean, there's not really much to breaking in a deck of playing cards. You just basically use them until they're not like slippery anymore. So that's basically like the main process of breaking in a deck of playing cards. Again, I don't break in my decks anymore because I don't really find it necessary. You can if you want, but yeah, I just don't care for it anymore. But yeah, I think that'll be about it for this video. Thanks for hanging out, and see you guys next time. Yeah.